The Sacramento sun, a hazy afternoon glow, slanted through the towering windows of Terminal 2, painting stripes of warmth across the polished floor. The air thrummed with the low hum of distant jets and the closer, more insistent chatter of travelers. At Gate C12, a small figure stood apart from the bustling crowd, her back ramrod straight, a powder blue suitcase clutched in her hand. Ariel smoothed the pleats of her new dress, a pale yellow that mirrored the hesitant sunlight, a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders. 12 years old, and about to embark on her first solo flight. The intercom crackled, a woman's voice, crisp and efficient, cutting through the general murmur. Pre-boarding is now available for Flight 743 to Birmingham, Alabama. We invite passengers needing special assistance. Ariel's breath hitched. Birmingham. Grandma Rose's apple pie, Grandpa Joe's booming laugh, the comforting scent of honeysuckle that clung to the porch swing. A nervous flutter erupted in her stomach, a swarm of butterflies taking flight. This is it, she thought, her fingers tightening around the worn leather strap of her suitcase. I'm really doing this. It had been her idea, this solo adventure. A chance to prove to herself, and perhaps to her ever so slightly overprotective father, that she was more than capable. Capable of navigating airports, of managing her own luggage, of being responsible. The thought of his worried frown, the way he'd meticulously packed her suitcase, checking and rechecking the contents, brought a faint smile to her lips. He'd even tucked a small, plush owl inside, her childhood comfort object, Mr. Snuggles. He was worried, she knew, but he'd also hidden his anxiety behind a mask of encouraging smiles and carefully chosen words. The pre-boarding announcement repeated, the same clipped tone urging passengers forward. Taking a deep breath, Ariel joined the small queue forming at the gate. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of excitement. This was it, the gateway to a new experience, a step towards independence. As she inched closer to the podium, she could make out the gate agent's name tag, Cheryl. Cheryl's expression was neutral, almost bored, her gaze sweeping over the passengers with an air of detached efficiency. When Ariel reached the front of the line, she offered her ticket, a crisp, first-class ticket her father had insisted on, wanting her to be as comfortable as possible. Cheryl took the ticket, her eyes flicking down to Ariel's face, then back to the ticket, then back to Ariel again. A flicker of something suspicion, disbelief, crossed her features. Are you traveling alone, sweetheart? She asked, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness that grated on Ariel's nerves. Ariel nodded, a small, polite smile playing on her lips. Yes, ma'am. Inside, a tiny voice whispered, don't patronize me. Cheryl pursed her lips, examining the ticket again. This is a first-class ticket, she stated, her tone now edged with something sharper. Yes, ma'am, Ariel repeated, the smile beginning to falter. Cheryl's gaze hardened. And you were 12? Ariel's cheeks flushed. The implication hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. She thinks I stole it. The thought hit Ariel like a physical blow. Yes, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Without another word, Cheryl took the ticket and, with a swift, decisive rip, tore it in half. The sound echoed in the sudden hush that had fallen over the small section of the gate. Ariel stared at the two halves of her ticket, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Humiliation burned hot in her throat, choking her. I don't understand, she stammered, her eyes welling up. Cheryl's voice, cold and impersonal, cut through the haze of her confusion. I'm sorry, but I can't accept this ticket. It's clearly fraudulent. A child your age traveling alone in first class, it's simply not credible. Ariel's breath caught in her throat. The tears she had been fighting back now spilled over, hot and stinging. It's not fraudulent, she cried, her voice trembling. My father bought it for me. He works for, before she could finish, a deep voice, calm yet edged with steel, interrupted. Cheryl, the word, spoken with quiet authority, hung in the air. Cheryl turned, her face paling slightly as she met the gaze of the man who had just spoken. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Martin," she stammered, her professional composure cracking. I was just Darius Martin, CEO of Martin Air," fixed her with a look that could have melted glaciers. "My daughter," he said, his voice low and controlled, "was merely trying to board her flight. The flight, I might add, that is operated by our airline." He gestured towards the torn pieces of the ticket, still clutched in Ariel's trembling hand. "Perhaps you can explain why you felt it necessary to destroy her property?" Cheryl's face, already pale, drained of all color. I thought," she stammered, her words dissolving into incoherent mumbling. Darius Martin did not take his eyes off her. "You thought," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft, "that my 12-year-old daughter, dressed as she is, could not possibly be traveling first class. You thought, without a shred of evidence, that she was attempting to defraud the airline that I own." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The small crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence. Ariel, still clutching the torn ticket, looked up at her father, her tears subsiding, replaced by a quiet sense of awe. He turned to her, his expression softening. "Ariel, sweetheart, why don't you go find a seat? I'll be with you in a moment." He watched as she walked away, her small shoulders squared, her head held high. Then he turned back to Cheryl, his face hardening once more. "This incident," he said, his voice cutting through the hushed whispers of the onlookers, "will be thoroughly investigated. And I can assure you, Cheryl, this is just the beginning." The wheels began to turn, silently, inexorably, setting in motion a chain of events that would ripple throughout the entire company. The quiet resolve in Darius Martin's eyes promised change, a change that went far deeper than a single torn ticket. The Sacramento airport hummed with a low, constant thrum, a symphony of rolling suitcases, chattering families, and the intermittent calls for boarding. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of Terminal 2, painting dust motes dancing in the air. Ariel inhaled deeply, a mixture of jet fuel and the faint sweetness of cinnamon from a nearby coffee shop filling her lungs. 12 years old, a brand-new passport nestled in her pocket, and the thrill of her first solo flight buzzing beneath her skin. This was it. This was freedom. Her grandparents' house in Boston, Christmas cookies, and stories by the fire awaited. She clutched her boarding pass, the crisp paper a tangible symbol of her independence. Gate C12, first class. A small perk, her father had said, for being so brave. She walked towards the gate, the polished floor reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead. A queue had already formed, a mix of business travelers in sharp suits and families laden with carry-ons. Ariel spotted the priority boarding sign and joined the shorter line, her heart tapping a quick rhythm against her ribs. This was it, her first step into the grown-up world. She smoothed down her dress, a navy blue A-line that her mother had chosen, and adjusted the strap of her small backpack. A woman with a name tag that read Cheryl stood behind the counter, her face etched with a weary impatience. Ariel watched as Cheryl efficiently scanned boarding passes, her movements precise and robotic. "Next," Cheryl called out, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. Ariel stepped forward, a polite smile playing on her lips. "Good afternoon," she offered, holding out her boarding pass. "Ariel Martin." Cheryl's eyes, the color of faded denim, flickered over Ariel's face, then down to her boarding pass and back again. A subtle crease appeared between her brows. The smile on Ariel's face faltered, a tiny seed of unease taking root in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? "Young lady, this is the priority boarding line. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Cheryl's voice was laced with a thinly veiled skepticism, each word carefully enunciated as if speaking to someone who might not understand. Ariel felt her cheeks flush with a sudden heat. Of course, she was in the right place. Her father had personally booked the flight. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice a little higher than usual. "This is my boarding pass." She held it out again, her fingers tightening around the edge. Cheryl took the pass, her fingers brushing against Ariel's. The touch was brief, But Ariel felt a jolt of something cold, almost reptilian, in the woman's gaze. The scrutiny was intense, uncomfortable, stripping away Ariel's carefully constructed confidence layer by layer. The airport's hum seemed to grow louder, the lights brighter, the air thicker. A knot formed in her throat. Cheryl scrutinized the boarding pass, turning it over and over as if searching for some hidden flaw. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of Cheryl's long, acrylic nails against the counter. Each tap felt like a hammer blow against Ariel's fragile composure. Doubt gnawed at her. Had there been a mistake? Was her father's name not on the ticket? Had he accidentally booked her on the wrong flight? "This isn't real," Cheryl finally said, her voice flat and dismissive. "Kids don't fly first class by themselves." Ariel's breath caught in her throat. The seed of unease blossomed into full-blown panic. "It is real," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "My father works for the airline." Cheryl's lips curled into a thin, disbelieving smile. "Oh, really? And which airline would that be, sweetheart?" "Martin Air," Ariel managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt small, insignificant against the backdrop of Cheryl's skepticism. She felt a sudden urge to shrink, to disappear into the bustling crowd. Cheryl's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something akin to surprise crossing her face. But it was quickly replaced by a hardening of her expression, a tightening of her jaw. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Little Miss Martin Air." She held up the boarding pass, her grip tightening. "And I suppose this little piece of paper grants you access to the champagne and caviar?" Before Ariel could respond, Cheryl ripped the boarding pass in half. The sound echoed in the sudden silence that descended around them. Ariel stared at the two halves of the ticket fluttering to the counter, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The airport's hum faded into a dull roar. The lights seemed to dim, casting long, distorted shadows. Her carefully constructed world of independence and excitement crumbled around her. Humiliation washed over her, hot and stinging. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Now, why don't you go back to the main line where you belong?" Cheryl said, her voice devoid of any trace of remorse. "And tell your little fibs to someone who cares." A deep, resonant voice cut through the stunned silence. "Is there a problem here, Cheryl?" Ariel's head snapped up. Her father stood behind her, his face impassive, his eyes like chips of ice. He was tall and imposing, his presence radiating an aura of quiet power. He placed a hand on Ariel's shoulder, the warmth of his touch a stark contrast to the coldness she had felt moments before. Cheryl's face paled. The smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of dawning realization. Her eyes darted from Ariel to her father, then back to the torn pieces of the boarding pass lying on the counter. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking ashen and brittle. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She seemed to shrink under Darius's gaze, her bravado dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The knot in Ariel's throat loosened, replaced by a surge of something fierce and protective. Her father was here. The fluorescent lights of Gate C-12 hummed, a dull counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases and chattering travelers. Ariel stood frozen, the torn pieces of her ticket clutched in her hand like fallen confetti. Around her, the airport buzzed, oblivious to the tiny fissure that had cracked open in her world. Just moments ago, this had been a gateway to adventure, the threshold to her first solo flight. Now it felt like a cold, sterile box, reflecting back the raw, stinging humiliation that burned in her chest. "I did everything right," she thought, the words echoing hollowly in her mind. "I checked in online, I printed my boarding pass, I even double-checked the gate number." She'd practiced this moment countless times, visualizing the smooth glide of her suitcase, the confident presentation of her ticket. Now that carefully constructed image lay shattered, replaced by the sneering face of the gate agent and the curious stares of the other passengers. A sob caught in her throat, a small, frightened sound that threatened to erupt into a full-blown wail. No, she told herself fiercely, biting her lip. Don't cry. Don't let them see you cry. But the dam was already cracking. The tears welled, blurring the edges of the departure board, distorting the announcements into a meaningless drone. Fumbling for her phone, her fingers trembled as she dialed her father's number. He was supposed to be in a meeting nearby, a last-minute conference call before seeing her off. Each ring felt like an eternity, amplifying the hollow ache in her chest. Finally, his voice, deep and reassuring, answered. Ariel? Everything all right? The simple question shattered the last vestiges of her composure. Daddy? She choked out, the words catching in a sob. She tore up my ticket. The silence on the other end was more terrifying than any shout. It stretched, heavy and pregnant with unspoken fury. Then, his voice, low and controlled. Stay right there. I'm coming. Ariel clutched the phone, her knuckles white, the plastic digging into her palm. The world around her seemed to fade into a hazy background as she focused on her father's words, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her emotions. He's coming. The thought repeated itself, a mantra against the rising tide of shame. The crowd parted, a ripple in the human sea, and Darius strode through, his presence radiating a quiet power. He was a man accustomed to command, his every movement precise and deliberate. He reached Ariel, his eyes scanning her face, taking in the tear-stained cheeks, the trembling lips, the crumpled ticket fragments in her hand. His expression was unreadable, a carefully controlled mask that hid the storm raging within. He knelt beside her, his hand warm and firm on her shoulder. Tell me what happened, he said, his voice soft, yet laced with steel. Through broken sobs, Ariel recounted the events. The gate agent's dismissive tone, the accusation of fraud, the humiliating spectacle of the torn ticket. With each word, Darius's grip on her shoulder tightened, his jaw clenching, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He listened intently, his gaze fixed on her face, absorbing every detail, every nuance of her distress. He wasn't just listening to her words. He was listening to the unspoken fear and humiliation that vibrated beneath them. Inside, his heart ached for his daughter, the injustice of the situation a raw, visceral wound. He'd built his empire, brick by painstaking brick, to provide a life for his children where such indignities wouldn't exist. Yet here it was, staring him in the face, a stark reminder of the insidious nature of prejudice. The gate agent, Cheryl, stood behind the counter, her face now pale, a flicker of unease in her eyes. She'd seen Darius's arrival, recognized the power he held, and the casual confidence she'd displayed moments ago had evaporated. Darius rose, his movements fluid and controlled, his gaze shifting from Ariel to Cheryl. The air crackled with unspoken tension. I believe my daughter told you that this is her ticket, he stated, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of his authority. He held out the torn pieces, offering them to Cheryl as if they were a priceless artifact. Cheryl stammered, Sir, I thought she's so young, the first-class ticket. It didn't seem. Her words trailed off, her justification sounding hollow even to her own ears. It didn't seem what? Darius pressed, his voice still even, but with an edge that cut through the ambient noise. It didn't seem likely that a 12-year-old girl could be traveling first class? Or perhaps it didn't seem likely that a young girl of color could afford such a ticket. Cheryl flinched, her face flushing crimson. The unspoken accusations hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The murmurs from the surrounding passengers grew louder, a chorus of whispers and sidelong glances. Cheryl opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent condemnation in their eyes. Darius continued, his voice unwavering. My daughter, Ariel Martin, is a passenger on this airline. She is entitled to the same respect and courtesy as any other passenger, regardless of her age or appearance. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the onlookers. This incident is not just about a torn ticket. It's about the assumptions we make, the biases we harbor, and the way we treat each other. It's about the culture we create and the values we uphold. He turned back to Cheryl, his eyes locking with hers. I expect a full apology to my daughter and a thorough explanation for this unacceptable behavior. Furthermore, I will be conducting a comprehensive review of our company's training procedures to ensure that this never happens again. Cheryl, her face still flushed, mumbled an apology, her voice barely audible. The words felt hollow, inadequate in the face of the damage she had caused. The shame she felt was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Darius turned back to Ariel, his expression softening. He knelt beside her again, taking her hand in his. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle. "Let's get you a new ticket and get you on your way to your grandparents." He looked at her, a silent promise in his eyes. This wasn't just about a flight. It was about ensuring that his daughter knew her worth, that she understood that no one had the right to diminish her, to make her feel small. He squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance. He would not let this incident define her journey. He would make sure of it. The afternoon sun, a hazy gold through the terminal's expansive windows, did little to warm the chill that had settled around Ariel. She stood a few feet from the gate agent's desk, a small island of misery amidst the bustling flow of travelers. The boarding pass, or rather the ragged remnants of it, felt like a physical weight in her pocket. Cheryl, the gate agent, was a blur of crisp efficiency, processing the next passenger with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ariel watched, each click of the keyboard, each swipe of a boarding pass, a tiny hammer blow against her fragile composure. Just a few minutes ago, this gate, this journey, had represented the thrilling precipice of a new adventure, her first solo flight. Now it felt like a public stage for her humiliation. The casual glances from other passengers, the murmur of conversations, all seemed to amplify her distress. Had they seen? Did they know? The shame burned hot in her cheeks. Footsteps, brisk and purposeful, broke through the fog of her despair. A familiar hand, large and warm, settled on her shoulder. "Ariel." She looked up, her vision blurred. Her father. Relief, potent as a drug, flooded through her. But it couldn't wash away the sting, the raw feeling of injustice. She swallowed, trying to dislodge the lump in her throat. "Daddy." Darius Martin's gaze swept over his daughter, taking in the subtle tremble of her lip, the redness around her eyes. The barely contained fury simmered within him, a cold fire in his chest. He had watched the entire scene unfold from the airport's coffee shop across the terminal. The initial confusion, the escalating argument, the blatant disregard for his daughter's distress. He knew, with a sickening certainty, what he had witnessed. It wasn't incompetence. It was something far more insidious. "Are you the one who tore up my daughter's boarding pass?" His voice, though quiet, carried an unmistakable steel. Cheryl, momentarily startled by his presence, turned. Her professional mask slipped, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Sir, there seems to be a misunderstanding." She claimed she had a first-class ticket. And Darius's single word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation. Cheryl shifted her weight, her gaze darting to the discarded pieces of the boarding pass still clutched in Ariel's hand. "She's 12, Cheryl explained, her tone laced with a hint of impatience, as if dealing with a particularly obtuse child. "And first class is not usually booked for unaccompanied minors." I assumed. She trailed off, the unspoken assumption hanging heavy in the air. A 12-year-old traveling alone couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket. It had to be stolen, a childish prank gone wrong. The assumptions, the casual dismissal, the casual cruelty. Darius felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This was his airline, his employees, and this was the kind of treatment they meted out to a child, to his child. His grip on Ariel's shoulder tightened, a silent reassurance. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over the counter. "You assumed?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low, each word a precise, deliberate blow. "Based on what? Her age? Her appearance?" Cheryl bristled, her professional veneer cracking further. I was following protocol, sir. It's my job to ensure the security and integrity of our flights. Security? Darius's laugh was short, sharp, devoid of humor. By humiliating a child? By publicly accusing her of fraud without a shred of evidence. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words sink in. My daughter is a Martin. Ariel Martin. Does that name mean anything to you? A flicker of recognition, then dawning horror, spread across Cheryl's face. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and shaken. Darius watched her, the cold fire in his chest hardening into ice. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to shout. The silence, the weight of his gaze, the sudden understanding of who he was spoke volumes. He was Darius Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Air. The man whose name was synonymous with the airline itself. The man whose daughter she had just publicly humiliated. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the force of a thunderclap. This is my airline, Ms. Whitman. And I assure you, this is not protocol. This is prejudice. This is the kind of casual bias that has no place in my company. He straightened, his gaze sweeping over the small crowd that had gathered, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. And I will personally ensure that it never happens again. He turned, his hand still resting protectively on Ariel's shoulder. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you on your flight. He led her away, leaving Cheryl standing behind the counter, a statue of stunned silence, the echo of his words ringing in her ears. The hum of the airport, the announcements, the shuffling feet of passengers, all seemed to fade into the background, leaving her alone with the crushing weight of her actions. The carefully constructed walls of her professional persona crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The truth she had tried so hard to ignore. She had judged a child, based not on facts, but on assumptions, on prejudices she hadn't even realized she harbored. And in doing so, she had not only humiliated a young girl, but had exposed a deep flaw within the very heart of the company she worked for. A flaw that, thanks to the girl's father, would now be brought into the harsh light of day. The silence around her felt thick, suffocating. The weight of her mistake settled upon her, heavy and inescapable. The hum of the airport, a constant, low thrum against the glass walls of Terminal 2, usually energized Ariel. Today, it vibrated against her skin like a swarm of angry bees. Each rolling suitcase, each hurried footstep, each echoing announcement grated on her nerves, amplifying the hollow ache in her chest. She watched her father, a comforting silhouette against the bright expanse of the gate area, speak softly to a different flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. He squeezed Ariel's hand, a silent reassurance, before turning away. The woman offered her a small, sympathetic smile. Ariel swallowed, the lump in her throat refusing to budge. The excitement of her first solo trip had evaporated, replaced by a bitter chill that settled deep in her bones. She'd pictured this moment 1,000 times, boarding the plane, finding her seat, looking out the window as the world shrunk beneath her. Now all she could see was Cheryl's face, contorted in disbelief, then disdain. The crisp rip of the ticket echoed in her ears. Darius walked towards Cheryl, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. The bustling airport faded around him. His focus narrowed to the woman who had dared to humiliate his daughter. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Cheryl, initially oblivious, turned, a flicker of recognition in her eyes quickly replaced by a professional mask. "Sir, is there something I can assist you with?" she asked, her tone clipped, devoid of the saccharine sweetness she had used with other passengers. He doesn't look like the type to cause a fuss, she thought, quickly assessing his expensive suit and calm demeanor. Probably just another delayed flight complaint. "We need to talk," Darius said, his voice low but firm. He gestured to a row of empty seats away from the boarding area. A knot tightened in Cheryl's stomach. Something in his tone, a steel beneath the velvet, unnerved her. She followed him, her mind racing, trying to decipher the source of his displeasure. Had she made a mistake? Impossible. She'd been doing this job for 15 years. She knew the signs. They sat, the silence between them heavy, punctuated only by the distant announcements. Darius took a deep breath, composing himself. He had to handle this calmly, rationally. He wouldn't let his anger, his protective instinct, cloud his judgment. He needed to understand. "You tore up my daughter's ticket," he stated, his voice even, each word a carefully placed stone. Cheryl bristled. "I believed it to be fraudulent," she retorted, her voice laced with defensiveness. "It's my job to ensure the security of this airline." He's probably one of those entitled fathers, she thought, thinking his precious little girl can do no wrong. "Did you scan it?" Darius asked, his gaze unwavering. Cheryl hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I acted on instinct. It's part of my job to prevent fraud." The words felt hollow even to her own ears. Darius leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word a hammer blow. "I built this airline," he said, the quiet intensity of his voice more powerful than any shout. "I named it after my father, a man who taught me the value of hard work, honesty, and respect. You assumed that my daughter," his voice thickened with emotion, "was trying to pull something without even scanning it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Because she's 12. Because she's traveling alone." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, turning it to face Cheryl. "This," he said, tapping the screen, "is the security footage from the check-in counter. It clearly shows my daughter receiving her first-class ticket. A ticket she earned with her own hard work by winning a national science competition." He watched her face, the blood draining from it as the realization of her actions dawned upon her. Cheryl stared at the screen, the image of Ariel, small and proud, clutching her ticket, a stark contrast to the suspicion and disdain she had shown her. The knot in her stomach tightened, twisting into a painful coil of shame. She had been so sure, so certain. But certain of what? That a child, a black child, must have stolen a ticket because she couldn't picture her in seat 1A? The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. The carefully constructed walls of her professional persona crumbled, revealing the ugly truth of her implicit bias. Her carefully crafted justifications, the shield she had erected against her own insecurities, dissolved, leaving her exposed, vulnerable. She stammered, her voice cracking. The words wouldn't come. What could she say? How could she explain the inexplicable? Justify the unjustifiable? Darius watched her, the anger slowly receding, replaced by a weary resignation. This wasn't about Cheryl Whitman. This was about a system, a culture that allowed such biases to flourish unchecked. This was about his daughter, and countless others who faced similar judgments, subtle and overt, every single day. He had built this airline on principles of fairness and equality, and he had failed to see the cracks in the foundation, the insidious creep of prejudice that had taken root within his own company. "This isn't just about you, Ms. Whitman," he said, his voice regaining its composure. "This is about all of us. This is about the kind of world we want to create, the kind of airline we want to be." He closed the tablet, his gaze meeting hers. "I expect your resignation on my desk by the end of the week. And," he added, his voice hardening, "expect a company-wide review of our training procedures. This cannot happen again." He stood up, his silhouette once again tall and imposing against the backdrop of the bustling airport. He turned and walked away, leaving Cheryl sitting alone, the weight of her actions pressing down on her, the echo of his words ringing in her ears. The hum of the airport, once a background noise, now seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of her failure. The chill that had settled in Ariel's bones began to thaw. Her father's quiet strength, the unwavering conviction in his voice, had warmed her from the inside out. She didn't fully understand the complexities of what had just transpired, But she understood one thing. Her father had her back. And that, for now, was enough. The saccharine scent of cinnamon rolls from the nearby Cinnabon battled with the sterile tang of airport disinfectant, a peculiar olfactory duel Ariel hadn't anticipated as part of her grand adventure. She clutched her boarding pass, the glossy cardstock slick against her palm. Gate C12. This was it. Her first solo flight, a thrilling leap toward independence. A vibrant thread in the tapestry of adulthood she was just beginning to weave. Grandmother's apple pie, grandfather's booming laughter, the familiar creak of their porch swing, these comforting images danced in her mind, eclipsing the initial pang of separation from her parents. Next, please. The gate agent's voice, clipped and impatient, snapped Ariel back to the present. It was the woman with the tightly pursed lips and the name tag that read Cheryl. Ariel approached the podium, a practiced smile playing on her lips, the same one she used to disarm her father's sternest boardroom associates. She extended her ticket, the first-class emblem a small, private thrill. Cheryl's eyes, the color of a winter sky just before a storm, narrowed as they scanned the ticket and then flickered up to Ariel's face. A barely perceptible wrinkle creased her brow. The smile on Ariel's face wavered. Something was wrong. An uncomfortable silence stretched, punctuated only by the muffled announcements echoing through the terminal. A seed of unease began to sprout in the pit of Ariel's stomach. Had she made a mistake? Had she somehow ended up at the wrong gate? The excitement she'd been clinging to began to fray at the edges. This ticket? Cheryl began, her voice dripping with skepticism. Is this yours? Ariel's grip tightened on her small carry-on. Yes, ma'am, she replied, her voice a little higher than usual. It's for the flight to Boston. Cheryl's lips pressed together into a thin, disapproving line. She held the ticket up to the light, scrutinizing it as if searching for some hidden imperfection. A first-class ticket, she muttered, more to herself than to Ariel. For a child. Ariel felt a flush creep up her neck. A child. The word hung in the air, sharp and dismissive. She was 12, not a toddler. She was perfectly capable of traveling alone. Her father had made sure of that. He had meticulously prepared her for every step of the journey, instilling in her a sense of responsibility and self-reliance. But in Cheryl's eyes, she saw only a child, an imposter, unworthy of the privilege she held in her hand. There must be some mistake, Cheryl announced, her voice taking on a sharper edge. This ticket is obviously fraudulent. Ariel's breath hitched. Fraudulent? Her father, the CEO of the airline, had personally booked this ticket. How could it be fraudulent? No, ma'am, she stammered, her eyes widening in disbelief. It's not. My father, before she could finish her sentence. Cheryl ripped the ticket in half. The sound, crisp and final, echoed in the sudden hush that had fallen over the small section of the gate area. Ariel stared at the two halves of her ticket, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The image of her grandparents' welcoming smiles shattered, replaced by a wave of humiliation so intense it made her chest ache. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction. She would not crumble under the weight of her judgment. A deep, resonant voice cut through the tense silence. Is everything all right here? Ariel's head snapped up. Her father. He stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the torn pieces of the ticket clutched in Cheryl's hand. Relief, sharp and potent, washed over Ariel, momentarily eclipsing the lingering sting of humiliation. She had never been so grateful to see her father's face. Cheryl's eyes widened, her face paling slightly. Mr. Martin, she stammered, her composure cracking. I didn't. She tore up a miner's first-class ticket. Darius Martin stated, his voice calm but laced with steel. He picked up the two halves of the ticket from the counter, his fingers brushing against Cheryl's. Didn't scan it, didn't ask questions, just assumed she was lying. Cheryl opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked from Darius to Ariel, her eyes darting nervously. A flicker of fear crossed her face. A man in a crisp navy blazer, the gate manager, hurried over, his face etched with concern. "Mr. Martin," he said, addressing Darius, "I apologize for any inconvenience. Please, allow me to rectify this situation immediately." He turned to Cheryl, his expression hardening. "Cheryl, please step away from the podium. You are relieved of your duties for the day. We will discuss this further later." Cheryl, her face now ashen, mumbled something unintelligible and retreated from the gate. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. The small crowd that had gathered dispersed, whispering amongst themselves, their glances a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Darius knelt down beside Ariel, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice gentle. Ariel nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The tears she had held back finally began to spill silently down her cheeks. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the sudden realization of how quickly assumptions could turn into actions, how easily prejudice could wound. Darius pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and reassuring around her. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough. It was a silent promise of protection, a quiet affirmation of her worth. In that moment, amidst the bustle of the airport, surrounded by strangers, Ariel felt a profound sense of connection. A bond forged not just by blood, but by a shared experience of injustice. The incident, though painful, had revealed something deeper, something more profound. It had illuminated the subtle biases that existed even in the most familiar of places, and it had ignited a spark of resolve within them both. This wouldn't end here. The gentle hum of the engines vibrated beneath her, a low thrum that seemed to seep into her bones. Ariel nestled into the plush leather of 1A, the seat impossibly wide, swallowing her small frame. 4 hours to Birmingham. 4 hours to escape the residual sting of humiliation, to burrow into the comforting embrace of her grandparents. Yet, the crisp linen against her cheek felt less like luxury and more like a bandage over a still tender wound. She'd imagined this moment differently, the thrill of her first solo flight, the small triumph of navigating an airport alone, all culminating in the quiet sanctuary of first class. Instead, the memory of Cheryl's disbelieving sneer, the public spectacle of her ticket being torn in two, played on a relentless loop in her mind. Each replay brought a fresh wave of heat to her cheeks, a tightness to her throat. She closed her eyes, willing the image to dissolve, to be replaced by the anticipated warmth of her grandmother's hug. A gentle chime announced the end of boarding, followed by the captain's smooth baritone welcoming them aboard. Ariel opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the intricate stitching of the headrest in front of her. Anything to avoid looking around, to avoid seeing the curious glances, the knowing smiles. Were they judging her? Did they recognize her? The daughter of the CEO, reduced to a spectacle of childish entitlement. The thought made her stomach clench. She wished she could disappear, melt into the plush leather and become invisible. A woman settled into the seat beside her, a kind face framed by a cascade of silver curls. She offered a warm smile, a silent acknowledgement of shared space in this privileged cabin. Ariel returned the smile, a small, tight movement of her lips. The woman, her eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement, gestured towards the empty champagne flute on Ariel's fold-out table. "Your first time in first class?" The question, innocent enough on the surface, landed like a shard of glass in Ariel's chest. It wasn't a simple query. It was a veiled observation, a subtle probing of her right to be there. She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "Someone ripped my ticket in half because they didn't think it was real," she whispered, the words barely audible above the rising hum of the engines. The woman's smile faltered, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "Ripped your ticket? But you're here," she trailed off, her eyes searching Ariel's face, as if searching for an explanation. Or perhaps, confirmation of a suspicion. Ariel felt a fresh surge of anger, hot and prickly, rising from the pit of her stomach. It wasn't just about the ticket. It was about the way Cheryl had looked at her, the condescending tone, the assumption of guilt written across her face. "My dad, he owns the airline." The words felt heavy, leaden with the weight of the unfair advantage they represented. An advantage that hadn't shielded her from the sting of Cheryl's prejudice. The woman's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even a touch of embarrassment, crossing her features. "Oh," she breathed, the word laced with a complex mix of emotions Ariel couldn't quite decipher. A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken words, the unspoken recognition of the invisible barriers that separated them, the subtle prejudices that shaped their interactions. Ariel stared out the window, the world a blur of white clouds against a vast expanse of blue. She thought about all the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed because of her age, her appearance, her quiet demeanor. The subtle slights, the dismissive glances, the patronizing tones, they were like tiny paper cuts, individually insignificant, yet collectively leaving a deep, lingering ache. The woman beside her cleared her throat. "I understand," she said softly, her voice laced with a newfound empathy. "I've been mistaken for the help more times than I can count." She paused, a wry smile touching her lips. "Apparently, successful black women don't travel first class." Ariel turned back to her, a flicker of connection sparking between them, a shared understanding of the insidious nature of prejudice. It wasn't just about race or age. It was about the assumptions people made, the boxes they put you in, the labels they attached without a second thought. As the plane soared through the sky, Ariel felt a shift within her. The humiliation began to recede, replaced by a quiet resolve. This incident, as painful as it was, had unveiled a truth, a stark reality that she couldn't ignore. She couldn't change the way people perceived her, but she could control her reaction. She could choose to rise above the petty judgments, to define herself by her actions, not by the assumptions of others. She closed her eyes, no longer seeking escape, but embracing the solitude, the quiet strength that bloomed within her. The hum of the engines became a lullaby, a soothing rhythm that carried her towards her destination, towards the waiting arms of her family. She was still just 12 years old, but she knew, with a certainty that went beyond her years, that this was just the beginning of her journey, a journey of self-discovery, of resilience, and of quiet defiance against a world that often judged too quickly, saw too little, and understood even less. 4 hours to Birmingham. 4 hours to prepare herself for the future. A future she would face not with fear, but with the quiet strength of knowing who she was, regardless of what anyone else might think. The fluorescent lights of Birmingham Airport buzzed overhead, a sterile hum against the residual tremor in Ariel's small frame. Her brand-new backpack, chosen with such care and excitement just hours ago, now felt like a lead weight on her shoulders. The vibrant pink unicorn keychain, a gift from her father, seemed to mock her with its cheerful innocence. Just a few hours ago, it had danced with the rhythm of her hurried steps, a symbol of her first solo adventure. Now it swung listlessly, mirroring the hollowness in her chest. The tears she had fiercely suppressed in front of the gate agent, the murmuring crowd, and even her father, now threatened to spill over. She blinked rapidly, the airport blurring into a kaleidoscope of shimmering lights and distorted faces. Each hurried footstep, each echoing announcement, amplified the sense of isolation that pressed down on her. She just wanted to disappear, to rewind time, to erase the sting of the woman's disbelieving sneer, the casual rip of her ticket, the humiliating public spectacle of it all. The taxi ride to her grandparents' house was a blur. She stared out the window, the city lights streaking past like fallen stars, each one a reminder of the joyous anticipation that had been so cruelly extinguished. How could a piece of paper, a simple ticket, hold so much power? How could a stranger's judgment, delivered with such casual disdain, shatter the carefully constructed armor of a 12-year-old's bravado? She hadn't understood the look in the woman's eyes, the subtle curl of her lip as she'd scrutinized Ariel's clothes, her hair, her very being. Now, sitting in the back of the cab, the meaning sunk in with the weight of a physical blow. It wasn't about the ticket. It was about her, about how she looked, about who she was. The familiar scent of Grandma Ruth's jasmine tea enveloped Ariel as she stepped into the warm embrace of her grandparents' home. The house, a cozy bungalow nestled in a quiet neighborhood, was a haven, a sanctuary from the harsh realities of the world outside. The soft glow of the living room lamp cast long shadows on the walls, painting familiar patterns that whispered of comfort and belonging. Yet, even within this sanctuary, the residue of the airport incident clung to her like a second skin. She couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, marked. "What happened, baby?" Grandma Ruth's voice, soft as a summer breeze, broke through Ariel's silent turmoil. Her grandmother's eyes, usually sparkling with warmth and humor, were filled with a deep concern that mirrored the ache in Ariel's own heart. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken understanding. Grandma Ruth knew, without needing a detailed explanation, that something had gone terribly wrong. Decades of navigating a world that often viewed them with suspicion had honed her intuition, her ability to read the subtle cues of prejudice that often went unnoticed by others. "I just want to go home," Ariel whispered, the words barely audible above the gentle tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Home. Not the sprawling, modern house where she lived with her parents, but a place deeper, more fundamental. A place where she didn't have to explain, to justify, to defend her existence. A place where her identity wasn't constantly questioned, dissected, and judged. Grandpapa, his face etched with the wisdom of years, gently took her hand in his. His touch, firm yet gentle, was a grounding force, a silent reassurance in the storm of her emotions. He didn't pry, didn't push for details. He simply offered his presence, a solid anchor in a sea of uncertainty. His silence spoke volumes, a language of shared experience, of understood pain. He had navigated these treacherous waters long before she was even born, and his very presence was a testament to the resilience of their family, their community, their spirit. "You remember who you are, not what they think you are." Grandpapa's voice, deep and resonant, filled the room. His words were not merely a platitude, but a hard-won truth, forged in the crucible of a lifetime spent battling prejudice and discrimination. They were a reminder of the legacy of strength, of dignity, of unwavering self-worth that had been passed down through generations. They were a shield against the slings and arrows of a world that often sought to diminish them. Ariel looked at her grandparents, their faces etched with a mixture of pain and unwavering love. She saw in them the reflection of her own history, her own heritage. She saw the unbroken chain of resilience that stretched back through time, connecting her to a long line of ancestors who had faced similar challenges, similar injustices, and had emerged stronger, more determined, more resolute in their commitment to their own humanity. In that moment, the shame and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a quiet understanding, a nascent sense of empowerment. The woman at the airport, with her dismissive sneer and casual cruelty, represented a small, fleeting moment in the grand tapestry of her life. She was a blip, an anomaly, a testament to the ignorance that still lingered in the world. But she was not the defining narrative. Ariel's story, her identity, was woven from stronger threads, from the love of her family, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the unwavering belief in her own inherent worth. The tears that had threatened to overwhelm her now subsided, replaced by a newfound resolve. She would not let the actions of one person, one fleeting moment, diminish her spirit. She would remember who she was, not what they thought she was. And in that remembrance, she would find the strength to rise above the prejudice, the ignorance, and the hate, and embrace the fullness of her own being. The journey had been marred, the initial excitement tarnished, but the destination remained. She was here with her grandparents, in the warmth and safety of their love. And that, she realized, was all that truly mattered. The muted hum of the air conditioning unit was a constant companion in Darius's office, a low thrum against the backdrop of the city spread out beneath his window. Sacramento shimmered in the late afternoon sun, a tapestry of rooftops and tree-lined streets, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil that had rippled through Martin Air this past week. He reread the memo for the 10th time, each word a carefully chosen stone in the edifice he was attempting to build. A new Martin Air, an airline that valued its customers not as numbers on a manifest, but as individuals, as human beings deserving of respect. The incident at Gate 4B still pricked at him, a fresh wound. He saw again the stricken look on Ariel's face, the small, vulnerable figure dwarfed by the gate agent's aggressive stance. He had felt a cold dread creep through him, a chilling premonition of the damage such callous indifference could inflict, the casual cruelty of assumptions, the way people, even good people, could be blind to their own biases. He'd built this company from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into every detail. And yet, somewhere along the way, this rot had set in. A rot that allowed an employee to tear up a child's valid ticket, to humiliate her in front of strangers, simply because she didn't fit some preconceived notion of what a first-class passenger should look like. He could still feel the clenching in his gut, the urge to shield Ariel, to erase the hurt from her eyes. But he knew a father's love, while powerful, couldn't undo the damage, could only offer comfort, a safe harbor in the storm. What was needed was a fundamental shift, a change in the very DNA of his company. "Daddy!" Ariel's soft voice broke through his thoughts. He looked up, a small smile touching his lips. She stood in the doorway, her reflection shimmering in the glass wall behind her. He noticed the subtle shift in her posture since the incident, a quiet resilience, a newfound awareness. He had spent every possible moment with her this week, every shared activity, every whispered conversation a testament to the silent promise he had made to protect her. "Come in, sweetheart." He gestured towards the chairs arranged near the panoramic window. Ariel settled into the seat, her gaze drifting over the cityscape. "Is that the memo?" she asked, nodding towards the papers in his hand. He nodded. "It is. I wanted your input on it, remember?" Her presence here, her involvement in this process, was more than symbolic. It was a declaration, a message to his employees, to the world, that this was not just a policy change but a personal commitment. Ariel leaned closer, her fingers tracing the lines of text. "If our team can't look a stranger in the eye and give them the same respect they'd give their own child," she read aloud, her voice soft but clear, "then they're not ready to be in front of a gate or a person." A flicker of something pride, relief, a touch of sadness passed through his eyes. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. She looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "I like that," she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "It's kind." The word hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Kindness. It wasn't a word often associated with corporate policy, with operational procedures. But that, he realized, was precisely the point. This wasn't just about revising training manuals or implementing new protocols. This was about fostering a culture of empathy, of human connection. He wanted his employees to understand that the people they interacted with weren't just passengers, but individuals with their own stories, their own hopes and fears. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "Your worth isn't up for debate," he said, his voice firm yet filled with a quiet intensity. "Not at a gate, not in an office, not anywhere." Ariel's answering smile, though small, warmed him from the inside out. It was a fragile thing, this newfound understanding between them, forged in the crucible of a painful experience. But it was also a powerful thing, a testament to the enduring strength of love and the possibility of growth. The memo, when it finally went out, would be more than just a list of new guidelines. It would be a reflection of this shared moment, a promise to prioritize human dignity over efficiency, empathy over indifference. It would be a reminder to every employee, from the baggage handlers to the pilots, that every interaction mattered, every person deserved to be seen, truly seen. Because within the seemingly ordinary act of looking someone in the eye and acknowledging their worth, lay the foundation for a more just and compassionate world. And that, Darius knew, was a legacy worth fighting for.